Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are plunging into the works of Friedrich Nietzsche. And specifically, we're talking about a thinker who is, almost universally known for his scorching critique of pity and weakness.
Yeah, what he called Mitleid or compassion.
Exactly. When you think of Nietzsche, you're thinking of the Übermensch, the will to power, the rejection of slave morality.
Right.
You're definitely not thinking of him as some kind of major figure in the history of emotional psychology.
And that right there, that's the hook. That is the major historical oversight we're hoping to correct today.
It really is an oversight, isn't it?
It's huge. Nietzsche has been, effectively scrubbed from the history of empathy research. You can check the standard texts, the Stanford Encyclopedia, Philosophy, Histories of Psychology.
And it's all Schopenhauer.
Schopenhauer's Vischer, Theodore Lipps. Nietzsche, the great psychological naturalist, he's simply forgotten in this context.
Which is wild, because the dominant narrative is always, well, because he hated the moral outcome of pity, he must have rejected the whole psychological mechanism, the mechanism that lets one person feel the pain of another. But the sources we're drawing from today, and we're talking chiefly about his middle period works.
Dawn and Human, all too human.
Right. They showed he didn't just reject the mechanism. He proposed a stunningly detailed, physiological, and frankly, a very, very modern model of how empathy actually works.
It's so important to frame these texts for you. Dawn and Human, all too human, they come from what scholars often call his positivist or free spirit period.
Right.
He was actively shedding all that metaphysical baggage from his earlier work and committing himself to a really strict naturalistic methodology. He was using science physiology, history, linguistics as a tool for philosophical critique.
So our mission in this deep dive is, I guess, twofold. First, we need to analyze Nietzsche's naturalistic account of empathy, which, as you said, anticipates contemporary theories like the perception-action model.
It really does. Yeah.
And second, and maybe this is more important, we need to understand the precise philosophical war he was waging. Why did he feel this incredible need to demolish the reigning theory of his era?
Which was Arthur Schopenhauer's metaphysical account of compassion.
Exactly.
And just to be super clear here, when we say Nietzsche used naturalism, it wasn't just descriptive. He wasn't just saying, here's how it is. It was a critical method.
What do you mean by that?
Well, he wanted to show that what we elevate as moral or divine, feelings like pity or altruism, are at their root thoroughly and often quite basely human.
Grounded in the mud, basically.
Grounded in evolutionary necessity, physiological adaptation, social calculation, not in some grand cosmic moral order.
Okay, so to really appreciate how radical Nietzsche's theory is, we have to start with the imposing philosophical structure he was so determined to tear down. And that structure is Schopenhauer's theory of Mitleid, compassion.
Yeah, and Schopenhauer set the bar impossibly high. For him, genuine compassion wasn't just, feeling bad for someone.
No.
It was the sole, unconditioned basis for all of morality. And crucially, it was rooted in a metaphysical rather than psychological understanding of reality.
Okay, let's unpack that. What kind of reality are we talking about here?
So Schopenhauer, he's following Kant, and he believed the underlying reality of the world, what he called the will, is unitary. It's one single thing.
One thing, go.
We, as individuals, we only appear separate because we're perceiving reality through this veil of space and time. He called it the principium individuus unus.
Right, the principle of individuation.
Exactly, the principle that makes you, you and me, me. So ordinarily, I see myself as distinct and separate from you. I have my pain, you have yours.
Sure.
But Schopenhauer argues that genuine compassion is basically an ethical miracle.
A miracle.
Because it involves the momentary overcoming of that boundary. It provides, and this is the key phrase, unmediated perceptual access to the other person's suffering.
That seems like an enormous philosophical hurdle. I mean, how can one mind gain unmediated access to another mind without violating the very definition of being an individual?
That's the paradox. That's exactly the point. Schopenhauer insists that for compassion to be truly moral and not just, egoistic pity like, oh, I'm glad that's not happening to me, it cannot be explained purely psychologically.
Right.
Because if it were psychological, you could trace it back to self-interest somehow. So for him, the moment of true compassion must be metaphysical.
It has to be.
In that moment, the ego's self-contained boundary is overcome, and we achieve this experience of oneness.
That sounds more like a religious or mystical intuition, something well beyond the reach of any kind of scientific measurement.
It is entirely described in those terms. Schopenhauer's description of the feeling is immediate and and almost violently contradictory to our normal experience. He argues that the suffering is felt directly in the other person. He says, it is precisely in his person, not in ours, that we feel the suffering.
Wow. And that famous quote is so visceral. He describes it as if we share the suffering in him in spite of the fact that his skin does not enclose our nerves.
Yes.
It's literally an assertion that our internal, unified essence, our will, is temporarily flowing past our physical boundaries.
The literal blurring of boundaries, yes. And the consequence of this metaphysical link is absolutely critical for his ethics.
Yeah. So,
since you feel the other person's fate as if it were your own, your concern for them becomes precisely as strong as your concern for yourself. He says, the individuality and fate of others are treated entirely like one's own.
So if you manage to achieve this mystical intuition, you are, by definition, moral.
Right.
This metaphysical capacity is an innate human disposition that's built into our hardware, which means other-oriented concern has to accompany true empathic attunement.
That's his conclusion, exactly. Compassion is innate, it's immediate, it's metaphysical, and it is necessarily tied to altruistic action. This entire super high bar framework is precisely what Nietzsche targets.
He just takes a wrecking ball to it.
Completely. For him, this wasn't some profound insight. It was, and I think this is his phrase, rapturous and worthless poppycock.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like Nietzsche.
It was just masking a simple physiological process. He wants to show that we can explain everything Schopenhauer attributed to the will through purely naturalistic, non-metaphysical means.
So the stage is set. Can psychology explain what Schopenhauer required metaphysics to achieve?
So before we jump right into Nietzsche's mechanism, I think we need to pause and just establish the conceptual distinctions that Nietzsche was navigating. And what's amazing is how well they align with contemporary psychology.
Okay.
We tend to use empathy, sympathy, and compassion interchangeably, but the differences here are they're crucial.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Empathy.
Empathy is the basic affective capacity. It's the ability to share and understand another person's emotional state, usually by mirroring it or simulating it in yourself. It's fundamentally an information-gathering mechanism, a capacity to feel with someone.
Okay, so that's empathy. Then we have sympathy.
Sympathy is a bit broader. It's a feeling of psychological closeness or a perceived similarity. It's often summarized as a feeling of oneness.
Ah, but this is where the philosophical nuance really kicks in, right?
This is exactly it. Schopenhauer's oneness was a kind of mystical numerical unity. You and I temporarily become the same thing.
Right.
Nietzsche's idea of oneness is solidarity. It recognizes numerical distinctiveness. You are still you, I am still me, but we're sharing a common experience. Like we're fellow passengers on a ship caught in a storm.
That distinction is vital. Metaphysical fusion versus a sort of pragmatic, shared alignment.
Precisely. And that leads us to the big one, compassion or Mitleid.
Right.
Compassion is the fully moralized experience. It combines the cognitive capacity to understand the other person's state, the affective participation, which is empathy plus the moral driver,
Right.
empathic concern.
Which Nietzsche calls sympathetic affection.
Exactly.
And this framework, this is where Nietzsche delivers his first devastating punch to Schopenhauer.
Yeah, he argues that Schopenhauer made a massive and totally unproven assumption.
Which was?
That empathy and other-oriented concern necessarily go together. Nietzsche just flat out denies this fundamental linkage.
So you could be an incredible empathizer.
Oh, an exquisite empathizer. A master at reproducing the feeling of distress in yourself.
Without having the slightest desire to actually help the other person.
Not the slightest. No desire to act altruistically or improve their condition.
Well, that immediately makes empathy amoral. It's a neutral skill, like being good at mathematics. You can use it for good or for ill.
That's right. And if that moral link is broken, then Nietzsche can challenge Schopenhauer's whole motivational trigger.
Right, because Schopenhauer insisted that concern only arises from empathic distress, from co-suffering. The pain motivates the cure.
Exactly.
But Nietzsche, who is, forever the psychologist of affirmation, he offers this powerful alternative. Empathic joy.
Yes. He suggests that the prospect of vicariously sharing in another's joy at overcoming some need or adversity, witnessing and participating in their flourishing, carries more sustainable motivational force for genuine sympathetic affection than constantly sharing in their distress does.
So it shifts the whole social economy from just avoiding pain to actively maximizing shared affirmation.
Completely.
So let's track how he builds this positive, pleasure-based sociality. He starts, I think, with early human development, right? All too human.
Yeah, section 98. He starts with simple animal instincts and the basic search for pleasure. Sociality emerges not from some inherent moral sense, but because relations with others unlock this whole new class of pleasures, mating, playing, shared activity.
And crucially, when joy is shared, it enhances the pleasure for everyone involved.
Right. This shared positive experience is what dispels the natural mistrust and envy that we harbor toward outsiders.
So the foundation isn't mutual suffering, it's mutual good times.
Absolutely. He says that similar expressions of pleasure, or even confronting common dangers together, awaken the fantasy of empathy, a feeling of being somewhat alike.
That phrase, die Fantasie der Mitempfindung, that's the birthplace of social awareness.
And it's not mystical fusion, it's self-aware, shared experience.
The oldest alliance is built on this very pragmatic foundation. Everyone defends against threat and displeasure, but they do it for the benefit of every single individual. It's a self-interested group defense mechanism.
The conclusion is just undeniable for Nietzsche. Social instinct grows forth from pleasure, and this leads him to directly confront Schopenhauer on the whole innate nature of morality.
Because for Nietzsche, social instinct is not primary. It's not innate in humans.
No, at all. We are by nature malleable. Sociality is acquired through a long conditioning process. We have the potential to become social beings, but only if the environment and the conditioning force us to adapt our individualistic drives for the success of the collective.
Okay, so we start with pleasure as the destination. But the path to get there, the actual psychological mechanism, is developed through something much more visceral and primal. We need to transition now to the technical mechanics of empathy. And that's where Nietzsche brings in his evolutionary instructor.
That's the critical pivot. How does the desire for social pleasure translate into a rapid, involuntary psychological tool? It's secured through the ultimate motivator, fear. Pleasure provides the reward for sociality. Fear provides the skill set necessary to survive within it.
Okay, so let's unpack the core of Nietzsche's psychological theory. It's laid out so powerfully in Dawn, section 142. He argues that empathy is an originally non-moral or amoral capacity.
Right. It's designed purely for understanding and prediction through external expression.
This is where Nietzsche, he anticipates modern psychology by about 80 years. He moves away from the internal cognitive question, what is that person thinking? And he focuses entirely on the body's reaction.
He does. He says it's much more common to reproduce the feeling in ourselves by reproducing the other person's expression with our own body.
So what does that reproduction look like physiologically?
It's involuntary motor mimicry. A faint, maybe even undetectable similarity in muscle play, in the innervation of the face, the look in the eyes, a subtle shift in gait or bearing.
And why does mimicking the look of distress make me feel distressed?
Because of the age-old association between movement and sensation.
Okay, this is a direct reference to the idea that the brain doesn't necessarily distinguish between internally generated movement and externally observed movement when it's processing emotion.
Yes.
This is the physiological basis of the perception-action model.
It is, precisely. And this is where we can integrate this concept that Nietzsche borrowed from contemporary physiologists like Charles Fourier, psychomotor induction.
Psychomotor induction, tell us about that.
So Fourier described how one person's physiological state, or even their suggestion, could induce a similar state in another person, just through nerve resonance and the feedback loop between the muscles and the brain.
So psychomotor induction is the underlying physiological mechanism. If I see someone crying, my face muscles involuntarily twitch in a similar pattern. That twitch sends a signal back to my brain, and because of that age-old association, my brain generates the corresponding sensation of sadness.
Exactly.
It's induction, not intuition.
Exactly. We are physiologically susceptible to suggestion. Now, the big question is, why did we evolve such a mechanism? Why become so susceptible to the feelings of others? And Nietzsche offers this really stark answer: timidity.
The human being, as the most timorous of all creatures, had timidity, fear, as the instructress of that empathy.
Fear drove necessity. In a dangerous, competitive world, to survive, you must rapidly discern who the other person is. Are they friend or foe? Are they aggressive or submissive?
To misread a grimace or a posture could mean death.
It could. And this drive for self-preservation, this constant need to monitor and predict, rapidly developed the capacity for empathic mirroring as a critical survival skill.
And this explains why some commentators misread Nietzsche, and they think he's advocating for this purely aggressive curiosity.
That's the danger of focusing only on the fear part. But Nietzsche's point is really methodological. He acknowledges that fear drives the initial epistemic need, the need to know the other, but the resulting capacity, once it's liberated from its primitive survival context, it opens up new possibilities.
So he's saying, look, this amazing skill has humble, amoral roots. Don't sanctify it, use it creatively.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's try and formalize his proposed model. We can detail the 3 antecedent conditions for fully developed empathy, moving from the purely physiological to the highly imaginative.
Okay, so first we have mirroring. In German, Widerspiegeln. This is the automatic, involuntary, affective mimicry. It's emotional contagion.
The most primitive level.
The most primitive, the most basic vicarious reaction. Nietzsche uses the example of women's faces that he describes as quivering and glittering from ceaseless reproduction and mirroring of the feelings around them. If the process starts here, it's just physiological echoing.
Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2 is representational emotional knowing.
Right. This is the cognitive leap. The person recognizes their induced emotional state and then seeks to grasp the reason for it. They become aware that their feeling is caused by the interaction with the other person. This moves us from just mere feeling to actual understanding.
But Nietzsche, being the great skeptic that he is, immediately applies pressure here about the reliability of this knowledge.
Of course he does. He warns that we are notoriously poor self-observers. The person we are empathizing with might be entirely wrong about the cause of their own distress.
So we're dealing with their distorted self-beliefs.
We are. We can only reliably predict and understand others if we share a long history of common experience and environmental conditioning. It's never direct access. It's always interpretation.
Okay. And the third condition, sympathetic agreement.
This is the culmination, the self-conscious felt similarity, or the fantasy of empathy that we mentioned earlier. It's the highest form of emotional communion, where the numerical distinctiveness of the two people is recognized, but a deep bond or solidarity is fostered through that shared understanding.
Now let's go back to the foundational tool that enables all of this, mimicry. You said Nietzsche connects this directly to contemporary evolutionary thought. Tell us about the English researchers.
Right, so Nietzsche was reading works related to the ongoing debates after Darwin's theories, specifically the debates between Alfred Russel Wallace and others like Henry Walter Bates and Bennett about the function of mimicry in natural selection.
Okay.
For animals, protective mimicry like chameleons changing color or insects playing dead was absolutely essential for survival. It allowed them to monitor, predict, and evade their enemies.
So Nietzsche's drawing a straight line from animal protective adaptation to human social adaptation.
Absolutely. In Dawn, he argues that this animal behavior leads to a degree of self-awareness. The animal observes the effect of its actions on others and learns to look back at itself, to take itself objectively.
And humans just share and magnify this tendency.
Exactly. We conceal ourselves in society, adapting our opinions, our gestures, our demeanor to fit into specific classes or groups. We are social chameleons.
Which makes sense of his claim that mimicking gestures is actually older than speech.
It has to be. It's the foundational mechanism for communication. Mimicking gestures facilitates mutual understanding because it physically leads the imitator back to the corresponding sensation. When we see a child express joy and we mimic their smile, we induce the feeling in ourselves and establish rapport.
And this leads us to one of the most psychologically advanced concepts in his middle period. The idea that this adaptive mimicry, which is driven by fear, actually forces the internal development of moral character. He calls it the taming of nature.
This is such a profound insight. Seeming becomes being.
Right, from human all too human.
Yes. The drive to imitate is a precursor to social instinct. But it's more than that. Nietzsche suggests that our ancestors who were constantly fearing attack learned to mollify, pacify, wheedled up, bowed down. They learned to wear the friendly mask and maintain a benevolent face because it was strategically effective.
And this mechanism became ingrained.
Ingrained and genetically bequeathed, he says.
So, by habitually acting friendly and wearing the friendly mask, the individual forces the internalization of benevolent dispositions. The performance conditions the performer.
It's a remarkable prefiguring of modern behavioral and cognitive psychology. If you smile long enough, you actually start to feel happier. If you constantly suppress your egoistic impulses to maintain social harmony, those benevolent habits eventually force the growth of genuine, other-oriented dispositions.
So benevolence is a successful acquired byproduct of imitation.
Yes, driven by the fear of social exclusion or attack.
That's a staggering conclusion. So, social selection constantly manipulates our naturally selected egoistic drives. domesticating them not through divine intervention or metaphysical insight, but through continuous physiological conditioning and the simple necessity of appearing benign.
Fear and mimicry. The tools of survival teach us kindness. So given that Nietzsche has established empathy as this complex system of physiological induction and learned mimicry, the necessary philosophical consequence is the total demolition of Schopenhauer's claim to direct, truthful knowledge.
Right. For Nietzsche, empathy is inherently about imaginative simulation. It's an as-if process. We are extending our imaginative capacity to model what others are experiencing, but we are never, ever truly overcoming the boundaries of our own skull.
The emphasis on imagination is just paramount. He states it so clearly in Human, All Too Human. He says, we have to have a strong power of imagination, eine starke Kraft der Einbildung, to be able to feel compassion.
And if empathy were unmediated, direct access to reality, imagination would be totally redundant.
It would be.
This means the entire act is constructive and interpretive. We're adopting the other's emotional perspective by imagining how we would feel if we were in their exact context, drawing on our own past experiences and psychological landscape.
And this immediately makes empathy fallible. It's prone to misinterpretation, overprojection, and, most frequently, just the failure to perform the imaginative jump at all.
And that leads to his critique of the ordinary person's great lack of imagination.
Exactly. He argues that the reason ordinary people don't truly empathize with others' fate or suffering isn't because of malice, but because of psychological laziness.
That's a great way to put it.
They're confined by their own frame of reference. They take themselves to be more important than the world. Their self-interest dictates that they conserve their imaginative resources, making them unwilling or unable to perform the difficult cognitive labor required for deep simulation.
So the inability to empathize profoundly is a failure of imaginative effort, not a moral failure in the Schopenhauerian sense.
Precisely. And he cements this critique of direct knowledge using the brilliant actor analogy in Dawn.
The actor who believes they genuinely felt the suffering of the historical character they portrayed.
Yeah, and Nietzsche sees this belief as total self-delusion. The great actor's skill is in imitation and divination, in capturing the external signs, the appropriate gestures, the voice tones, the specific facial expressions that trigger that effective induction in the audience.
So they snatch the shadow of the soul.
The shadow of the soul, yes, the external manifestation.
Yeah.
But they never truly enter the subject's spirit or their actual experience.
Wow, that's a brilliant way to put it. The actor's success is proof of simulation, not fusion. It's the art of catching the shadow, not a mystical communion with the spirit.
It's the perfect distillation of his model. Empathy is representational, it's skilled, and it's bounded by our physical and imaginative limitations. And this is the final, total philosophical rejection of Schopenhauer.
So when Nietzsche demands that the philosophy of compassion should stop all your fantasizing, he is rebuking an entire tradition that demanded an intuitive awareness of numerical oneness.
He's saying, the mystery is solved. The mechanism is physiological mimicry, conditioned association, and imaginative projection. There is no need for metaphysical ghosts.
And you can really see why this was such a revolutionary philosophical move. By replacing metaphysical intuition with a physiological mechanism, Nietzsche completely secularized and demystified our deepest connections.
He turned them into adaptive tools rather than spiritual gifts.
Okay, so now that we understand that empathy is a physiological tool developed out of fear and perfected through imitation, we have to address the resulting moral motivation, sympathetic affection. Nietzsche doesn't reject it entirely, but he applies a really sharp economic critique to it.
He is incredibly cautious about unbridled care. His warning against excessive sympathetic affection in Dawn 143 is, it's truly provocative.
He does this thought experiment, right? What if the drive for care and sympathetic affection were twice as strong as it is now?
And he concludes that life on Earth would be unbearable. And this isn't just hyperbole. It's a profound psychological observation about human limitations and our flawed benevolence.
And why? Why would extreme kindness ruin life?
Because of our inherent foolishness and psychological imperfection. We are already experts at self-torment, self-deception, demanding too much of our own energy.
Right.
If we directed that same relentless scrutiny, that same misguided intervention and importunity toward others, everyone would take blind flight the moment the next person drew near. He suggests we would heap the same scorn on excessive sympathy that we currently reserve for unbridled egotism.
It's an argument for psychological sustainability, isn't it?
Yes.
We must be economical with kindness and goodness.
Absolutely. The need for economy serves multiple purposes. First, it spares others from our intrusive, perhaps misguided attempts at help. And second, and this is critical for Nietzsche, it preserves our own strength. If we constantly exhaust ourselves in caring for every tiny affliction of others, we drain the very capacity for self-affirmation and self-mastery that allows us to inspire others.
An exhausted caregiver can only offer depletion, not vitality.
Exactly.
And this circles back to the major flaw he identified in Schopenhauer's model.
Yeah.
It's total reliance on suffering. This is the shortcoming of suffering-based concern.
Right. People whose sympathetic affection is rooted solely in witnessing distress, those who are only helpful in misfortune, are often incapable of sharing in joy.
They can't do it.
When others are fortunate and overcome their struggles, these helpers often feel superfluous and discontented.
That's a biting insight.
No.
It implies that for some people, the motivation to care actually relies on the other person's suffering persisting.
Yes.
Because that maintains the helper's superior moral and psychological position.
It connects altruism to a subtle form of egoistic dependency. The traditional helper needs the misery of the world to justify their existence and exercise their power. Schopenhauer insisted that co-suffering empathic distress was the only trigger for genuine morality because he believed pleasure was merely the absence of pain.
And Nietzsche just utterly rejects that pessimistic view of pleasure.
He does. He asserts that joy, or the expectation of pleasure, is a causally efficacious primary motivator for empathic concern. This shift provides a foundation for sociality that is sustainable, constructive, and oriented toward growth, rather than perpetual pathology.
So what is the highest, most constructive form of sympathetic affection for Nietzsche?
It's the ability to genuinely rejoice in the other person's joy at overcoming struggles, taking satisfaction from their achievement, and sharing in that pleasure. It's a concern that's focused on affirmation and empowerment.
He illustrates this so beautifully in the unpublished notes from this period, describing solidarity through the metaphor of trees.
It's a wonderful image. He envisions friends who should rejoice in such a way that our joy is useful to others, growing beside one another like trees in a forest.
Right.
They grow stretched upward and straight because we extend ourselves by means of one another. It's mutual uplift, where growth in one party serves as a necessary condition and an inspiration for the growth of the other.
So we don't just patch up wounds.
No. We enable direction, excellence, and achievement.
And that reframes caring from a kind of palliative duty to a creative, shared endeavor. It's a testament to the power of shared affirmation over shared suffering.
So, if we synthesize this whole deep dive, I think we've successfully moved beyond the caricature of Nietzsche as a pure moral cynic. We've uncovered a sophisticated psychologist who offered a clear, scientific, and profound account of emotional connectivity.
We really have. We've established, I think, 3 major takeaways for you today. First, the profound methodological commitment to naturalism over metaphysics, using fear and evolutionary necessity to dismantle the idea of inherent moral unity.
And second, the detailed mechanism of empathy rooted in physiological mimicry and psychomotor induction, which proves that empathy is an amoral, predictive tool.
Right. And third, the philosophical necessity of prioritizing empathic joy as a superior motivator for solidarity, requiring us to be economical with sympathetic affection to preserve our own capacity for creative affirmation.
And what we've discussed today really is foundational to Nietzsche's later, more famous philosophical projects. His entire methodology of tracing concepts back to their non-moral, non-metaphysical, and physiological origins, whether it's empathy, guilt, debt, or conscience, it's fully developed right here in Dawn and Human, All Too Human.
It is.
But the profound questions raised by this naturalistic view, they continue to resonate. If the fundamental mechanism of social connection empathy is reducible to physiological susceptibility, automatic mirroring, and psychomotor induction, then how much of our supposed moral conduct is truly volitional?
That's the question. If our tendency to sympathize, to mirror happiness, and even to be good-natured is just an automatic adaptive drive, a highly sophisticated social echo chamber designed by fear and necessity, then what critical distance can we ever truly achieve from the social signals that surround us?
It forces us to ask, are we choosing our empathy and our resulting moral obligations, or is our body, conditioned by millennia of social pressure and physiological associations, choosing them for us?
And that question challenges the very core of moral agency.
It gives us a lifetime of reflection.
Indeed, it redefines what it means to be a free spirit in a world governed by physiological necessity. Thank you for taking this deep dive into the surprisingly modern psychology of Friedrich Nietzsche.
A pleasure as always.